It was Christmas Eve when I found myself driving for hours through one of the worst winter storms I had ever seen. Snow slammed against my windshield so hard it felt like the road might disappear at any second. The highway was nearly empty, ice coated the lanes, and my hands were tight on the steering wheel. Every mile felt dangerous, but I didn't slow down. I was tired, cold, and running on caffeine and determination, but I kept going. I was on my way to surprise my younger sister, Lauren Miller. She had moved to another state a few months earlier, and ever since then, her phone calls had felt strange. She kept saying she was fine, but something in her voice didn't sound right. Short answers. Forced cheer. Long pauses. I told myself she was probably just overwhelmed with the move, but the feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Christmas felt like the right time to show up, hug her, and remind her she wasn't alone. As the snowstorm grew worse, I kept thinking about how family is supposed to be everything. We lost our parents years ago, and since then, it had just been the two of us. I always believed that no matter what happened in life, we would look out for each other. That belief pushed me forward through the storm when logic said I should turn back. At one point, my car slid slightly on black ice, and my heart jumped into my throat. I slowed down, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself that this was worth it. Lauren would be shocked to see me. She would probably laugh and say I was crazy for driving in this weather. I imagined her opening the door, warm lights behind her, Christmas music playing softly. I risked my life driving through a Christmas storm to surprise my sister, but what I heard behind that door made me wish I'd never come. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. When I finally turned into her neighborhood, the snow was piled high along the sidewalks. Her house stood out with its porch light glowing against the darkness. Relief washed over me as I parked in the driveway. I sat there for a moment, letting the engine run, feeling proud of myself for making it through the storm. I grabbed my bag, stepped out into the cold, and walked up to the front door. Snow crunched under my boots, and my breath came out in white clouds. The house looked warm and alive, lights shining through the windows. Just as I reached for the doorbell, I heard voices coming from inside. I froze. They weren't muffled or distant. They were close, clear, and full of emotion. I couldn't make out every word yet, but I knew one thing instantly: I wasn't supposed to be hearing this. My hand dropped from the door, my heart started pounding, and I stood there in the cold, listening, completely unprepared for what was waiting on the other side. I stayed where I was, just outside the door, my body stiff and my mind racing. The first clear sound I heard was Lauren's laugh. It wasn't the tired, worried laugh I remembered from our phone calls. It was light, carefree, and sharp in a way that made my stomach twist. She sounded relaxed, almost proud, like someone who had no problems at all. That alone confused me, because it didn't match the picture she had painted for me over the past few months. Then I heard another voice, deeper and unfamiliar at first. A man. It didn't take long to realize it was Mark Reynolds, her fiancé. I had only spoken to him a few times on the phone, always polite and brief. Inside the house, his tone was different. Casual. Confident. Like he was talking in a place where he felt completely safe. My name came up, and I felt my chest tighten. Mark said it without hesitation, like I was part of a joke that had been told many times before. He called me too trusting and laughed, saying some people are just born easy to use. Lauren laughed along with him. Not awkwardly. Not uncomfortably. She laughed like she agreed. I leaned closer without thinking, my heart beating so hard I was afraid they might hear it. Lauren started talking about money, saying she had played things up so I wouldn't worry too much but would still help. She admitted she had exaggerated how bad things were, how tight her finances were, and how lonely she felt. She said she knew I would step in because I always did. Hearing her say it so casually felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Mark joked that I had basically paid for half the house they were sitting in. He laughed about the furniture, the renovations, even small things like groceries, all covered by my generosity. He said it like it was funny, like it was smart planning instead of something shameful. Lauren didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She added details, reminding him of the times she cried on the phone to make things sound worse than they were. My hands started shaking, and I had to press them against my legs to steady myself. The cold from outside didn't matter anymore. All I could feel was heat rising in my face and a tight knot forming in my throat. Every word they said chipped away at the image I had of my sister. This wasn't someone struggling and leaning on family. This was someone who had figured out exactly how to pull my strings. In that moment, everything became clear. The strange phone calls. The sudden emergencies. The constant reassurance that she would pay me back soon. None of it was stress. None of it was bad luck. It was planned. It was deliberate. I wasn't helping someone I loved through a hard time. I was being managed, like a resource they could tap whenever they needed. I stood there, listening, feeling smaller with every sentence. The trust one had carried for years didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, painfully, until I realized there was nothing left to hold on to. As I stood there in silence, my mind started drifting backward, pulling up memories I hadn't thought about in years. They came fast and heavy, one after another, like scenes from a life I suddenly didn't recognize anymore. I remembered the first time Lauren called me in tears during college, saying she couldn't cover her rent that month. I didn't hesitate. I sent the money the same day, telling her not to worry and to focus on her studies. I told myself that was what an older brother was supposed to do. Then there were the medical bills. She had said the insurance didn't cover everything and that she was scared of falling behind. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late at night, staring at the numbers on my screen, deciding which of my own bills could wait. I paid hers and told her we'd figure the rest out later. She thanked me, her voice soft and emotional, and I believed every word. One memory led to another. The loan. She needed help getting approved and promised it was temporary. I co-signed without thinking too much about it, trusting her completely. When my credit took a hit later, I brushed it off and told myself it was just money, just numbers. Family mattered more. That was the rule I lived by. After our parents passed away, everything changed. I became the one she leaned on, the one who stepped in when things got hard. I didn't mind the responsibility. In some strange way, it gave me purpose. Taking care of her made me feel like I was honoring what our parents would have wanted. I thought we were closer because of it. Lauren always thanked me, or at least that's what I believed. There were messages, phone calls, and promises that one day she would make it right. I never questioned her sincerity. It never crossed my mind that those words could be rehearsed or calculated. I thought gratitude meant honesty. I started thinking about the things I had put off for her sake. Trips I never took. Promotions I didn't chase because I wanted stability. Big dreams I told myself could wait until later. I convinced myself that sacrifices were temporary and that loyalty would eventually come back to me in some form. Standing there now, those memories felt different. Heavy. Contaminated. What once felt like love now felt like a list of transactions I never agreed to. Each kind moment replayed with a darker meaning attached to it. The generosity I was proud of suddenly felt like weakness in someone else's eyes. The pain wasn't just about money. It was about realizing that this wasn't one bad decision or a misunderstanding. It was years of small lies stacked carefully on top of each other. Every memory I treasured now carried doubt, and that hurt more than anything else. The voices inside shifted, and the tone changed in a way that made my chest feel tight. The laughter faded into something colder, more serious. Lauren's voice dropped, steady and confident, like she was finally saying the truth out loud. She admitted she never planned to repay me. Not now. Not later. Not ever. She said it wasn't said with guilt or shame, just like it was an obvious fact that didn't need explaining. Mark responded without surprise. He talked about the future, about how things would be easier once they were married. He suggested that after the wedding, they should slowly cut me off. fewer calls. Fewer updates. Less need for help. He said people drift apart naturally, and I would get over it. He spoke like I was a problem that would solve itself with time. Lauren laughed again. That same laugh that didn't sound like my sister anymore. She said they shouldn't rush it. She wanted to wait until after Christmas. She said to let me feel generous one last time, like it was a gift I was giving myself, not them taking from me. The way she said it made my stomach turn. There was no hesitation in her voice. No doubt. They went on, talking about me like I wasn't a person, just a role I played in their lives. Lauren said I needed family more than they needed me. She said I would always come through because I didn't know how to say no. Mark agreed and said some people are built that way. He said it wasn't their fault if I chose to give so much. They framed it as logic, not cruelty. I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't loud. It was quiet and final. The sadness didn't explode into anger. It settled into a heavy calm. I realized there was nothing left to hear. No explanation that could make this better. No misunderstanding to clear up. This was the truth, spoken freely because they believed I wasn't listening. I took a slow step backward, then another, careful not to make a sound. My boots sank into the snow as I moved away from the door. The cold air hit my face again, sharp and real. I didn't feel confused anymore. The fog in my head cleared, and for the first time that night, my thoughts felt steady. I walked back to my car without rushing. The storm was still there, snow falling thick and quiet, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt honest. I sat behind the wheel and rested my hands on it, noticing they weren't shaking anymore. My eyes were dry. The tears had stopped on their own. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back at the house. Whatever version of family I believed in was still inside those walls, but it wasn't real anymore. Something inside me had hardened, not into anger, but into clarity. I understood now, and that understanding changed everything. I stayed in my car while the snow kept falling, thicker now, covering the windshield little by little. The engine hummed softly, and the heater slowly warmed my hands. I didn't feel rushed. For the first time that night, I wasn't reacting. I was thinking. I knew that if I went back to that door, nothing good would come from it. If I confronted them right then, they would deny, explain, twist words, or cry. They would turn it into confusion instead of truth. I didn't want noise. I wanted clarity. I realized that silence, in that moment, was not weakness. It was control. Walking away without saying a word felt stronger than any argument I could imagine. They didn't deserve a warning or a scene. They had spoken freely because they believed I wasn't there, and that honesty mattered more than anything they could say to my face later. As the snow piled up, my mind shifted from emotion to facts. I started going over everything quietly, one piece at a time. The loans I helped with. The agreements we talked about. The paperwork I had signed. The messages saved on my phone. The emails confirming amounts and timelines. I wasn't guessing or assuming. I was remembering details I had been careful with from the start. Then something important clicked. Lauren had always treated those things like they were casual favors, like family help that lived only in conversation. But I knew better. I had kept records. I had saved documents. I had asked for confirmations, not because I didn't trust her, but because that was how I handled my life. Every amount sent. Every promise to repay. Every signature. It was all there, clear and solid. She had forgotten that part. Or maybe she never noticed it mattered. Either way, it meant the story wasn't just emotional anymore. It had structure. It had proof. That realization didn't make me happy, but it made me steady. I felt grounded again, like my feet were back under me. I looked at the house one last time through the windshield. The lights were still on. Life inside was moving on, unaware that anything had changed. I didn't feel the urge to knock. That door no longer represented safety or family. It was just a door now, and behind it were people who had made their choices. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled away. The tires cut fresh lines through the snow as I left the street. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't explain myself. I wouldn't sacrifice quietly anymore. As I drove back into the storm, I made one promise to myself. From this moment on, every step I took would be deliberate. No more reacting out of guilt or habit. No more confusing love with obligation. I would move forward carefully, calmly, and on my own terms. When I got back home, everything felt quiet in a strange way. The house looked the same, but I wasn't. I didn't rush into anything. I unpacked my bag, took a shower, and slept longer than I expected. When I woke up, my emotions felt distant, like they were sitting behind glass. That distance helped me focus. I started gathering things slowly, one step at a time. I pulled up my bank records and went through them carefully, marking dates and amounts. I opened folders I hadn't touched in years and found signed loan agreements I had nearly forgotten about. I scrolled through old messages where Lauren clearly said the money was temporary help and that she would repay me. Seeing everything laid out like that made it real in a different way. This wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a timeline. I kept my routine normal. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I didn't talk to anyone about what had happened. At night, I organized papers and saved copies, labeling everything clearly. I wasn't angry while doing it. I was calm, almost detached. That calm scared me a little, but it also felt necessary. A few days later, I contacted a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask for revenge or dramatic action. I just asked questions and listened. I wanted to understand my options and protect myself. The lawyer spoke in clear terms, focusing on facts, not emotions. That suited me. I left the meeting feeling informed, not fired up. Through all of this, I didn't change how I spoke to Lauren. She called like she always did, thanking me for being there for her, talking about Christmas plans, sounding warm and grateful. I answered calmly, kept my responses short, and didn't give anything away. I didn't accuse her. I didn't bring up money. I didn't ask questions. I let her believe everything was normal. Mark stayed in the background, never saying much. I could tell they were comfortable, confident that nothing had changed. That was fine with me. Comfort has a way of making people careless. Christmas came and went. I sent a simple gift. I made a short call. I smiled when I needed to and ended conversations early. On the outside, nothing looked different. On the inside, everything had shifted. I wasn't waiting for apologies or explanations anymore. I was waiting for the right moment. There was no rush. I understood now that timing mattered. Acting too soon would turn this into emotion again, and I didn't want that. I wanted precision. I wanted balance restored, not drama. As the holiday lights came down and life returned to normal, I stayed quiet. I kept organizing, planning, and preparing. The calm wasn't peace. It was a pause. And beneath that calm, something steady was forming. Christmas had passed, but the story wasn't over. Something else was coming, and this time I would be ready. The shift happened quietly, without any dramatic moment or warning. I followed the steps my lawyer explained and officially removed myself as a co-signer where I legally could. It wasn't emotional or impulsive. It was protection. Papers were signed, forms were filed, and for the first time in years, my financial future stopped being tied to someone else's choices. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I just did it. Soon after that, I moved forward with the repayment process based on the agreements that had been ignored for too long. Everything was done by the book. Clear numbers. Clear timelines. No insults. No personal attacks. Just facts laid out in plain language. I didn't ask for favors or forgiveness. I asked for what had already been agreed to. the effects showed quickly. Mark's tone changed when we spoke. The confidence I had heard in his voice before was gone. Conversations became shorter, tighter. I could tell the pressure was hitting them in places they hadn't planned for. Comfort turned into stress, and control started slipping. Lauren called me, upset and confused, or at least pretending to be. She accused me of betraying family, of turning my back on her when she needed me most. She said this wasn't who I was and that money shouldn't come between siblings. I listened without interrupting. I didn't argue or defend myself. I let her finish. When it was my turn to speak, my voice was steady. I didn't raise it. I didn't insult her. I told her exactly what I had done and why. I explained that I was simply honoring the agreements we both had made. Then I told her the part she didn't expect to hear. I said I was outside her door on Christmas Eve. I said I heard everything. The laughter. The plans. The words about using me and cutting me off. I didn't repeat it dramatically. I stated it plainly, like reading a fact from a page. There was a long pause on the line. No excuses came. No explanations followed. The anger disappeared, replaced by silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when there's nothing left to twist or deny. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smaller. She asked why I hadn't said anything before. I told her there was nothing to discuss that night. The truth had already been said. I didn't argue after that. I ended the call calmly. Afterward, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt closure beginning to form. I had said what needed to be said, once, without emotion or cruelty. The power shifted in that moment, not because I took something from her, but because I stopped giving blindly. The excuses were gone. The story had changed. And for the first time since that night, the weight I had been carrying started to lift. After everything was in motion, the effects started showing quietly but clearly. Lauren's relationship with Mark began to crack under the weight of reality. Decisions that had seemed easy before now carried real consequences, and the tension between them grew. Mark started questioning some of their choices, and small arguments began to pop up where there had been none before. The confidence they had relied on was fading. The house they had once bragged about, the place they claimed was theirs because of clever planning, suddenly felt uncertain. Bills, loans, and financial pressure made it clear that their lifestyle wasn't as secure as they had thought. Every step they had taken assuming I would keep helping them now carried risk. The comfortable world they had built on my willingness to support them began to wobble. Other family members started noticing changes too. They didn't need gossip or explanations. The documents I had kept spoke for themselves. Every payment, every agreement, every signed piece of paper painted the full picture. The truth was no longer a conversation to be avoided or a secret to manage. It was clear, factual, and undeniable. People began to understand the reality without anyone having to shout or accuse. I never argued with them. I didn't call to scold or demand apologies. I didn't try to justify myself to anyone. I refused to play the role I had played for years, the emotional safety net that always absorbed stress, debt, and manipulation. I stopped being the one who made everything easier for them at the expense of my own life. That safety net was gone, and they had no choice but to see it. Lauren started to realize, slowly, that the brother she had counted on, the one she could manipulate, was gone. I wasn't the same person who would overlook lies and schemes. I wasn't blind to the patterns or willing to ignore them. Her casual assumptions about my loyalty no longer held weight. I didn't need her approval or recognition for that change. The understanding she was forced to reach was the result of her actions, not my words. This wasn't about revenge. There was no anger driving me to act. There was no desire to hurt anyone. What I did was accountability, holding to facts, to agreements, and to the boundaries I had finally set for myself. I protected what was mine and ensured that I would no longer be used as a tool for someone else's benefit. The consequences fell naturally from their own decisions, not from my desire to punish them. For the first time in years, I felt control over my own life. I could focus on myself without guilt or hesitation. The lessons I had learned from their betrayal were sharp and clear, and they shaped how I moved forward. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply awake, aware, and free to protect my own well-being. In the days and weeks after everything unfolded, I felt a mix of emotions that was hard to untangle. Guilt crept in first, whispering that maybe I should have done more sooner, that maybe I could have seen it coming. Grief followed closely behind, heavier and slower. I mourned the sister I had thought I knew, the one I had trusted and sacrificed for. That version of her was gone, replaced by someone who had used my love for her own gain. But along with the guilt and grief, there was a strange sense of relief. I no longer carried the weight of blind trust or endless responsibility for someone else's choices. I had clarity, and that clarity felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. Lauren reached out a few times after the initial shock. But it wasn't to apologize or admit fault. Her calls and messages felt like attempts to smooth things over for her own comfort, to escape the consequences that were finally catching up to her. She didn't ask for understanding or repair. She wanted convenience. I listened once, twice, but eventually I stopped responding in the ways I had before. I didn't ignore her out of cruelty, I ignored her to protect myself. For the first time in my life, I set boundaries that I actually kept. I stopped answering every call immediately. I stopped helping automatically. I stopped making excuses for her behavior. I learned that boundaries aren't walls to block people out, they are lines that let you keep your sense of self intact. The freedom that came with those boundaries was strange, but necessary. It felt like finally holding on to something I had forgotten I deserved. I also understood something I hadn't fully grasped before: love without respect isn't love at all. You can care for someone deeply, but if they don't value you or your sacrifices, it isn't truly reciprocal. It's not a measure of failure on my part, it's a reflection of their choices. That realization stung, but it also felt empowering. I could still love my sister in my heart, but I didn't have to give her the power to hurt me anymore. Thinking back to that night, the storm takes on a new meaning. It wasn't just weather. It was a warning, a moment when the world pressed pause and forced me to see clearly. The danger on the road mirrored the danger in my life, trusting blindly, giving endlessly, and ignoring warning signs. That night showed me the truth, and I had no choice but to face it. Slowly, I started to rebuild, not my relationship with Lauren, but my own sense of stability and strength. I focused on what I could control: my life, my choices, and my boundaries. It wasn't easy. There were moments of anger, sadness, and temptation to go back. But every time, I remembered the night, the storm, and the lesson it brought. I realized that protecting myself didn't make me selfish. It made me wise. And that wisdom would guide me forward. Looking back on everything, I realized that betrayal often comes from the people we trust the most. It's painful because it hits deeper than anything a stranger could do. You don't expect the people closest to you to take advantage of your love and generosity. But understanding that truth doesn't make it weaker, it makes you wiser. I finally saw the reality of my relationship with Lauren and Mark, and I accepted it without anger, only clarity. I also learned that revenge isn't always about hurting someone in return. It's not about yelling, exposing them, or causing public shame. True revenge can simply be removing yourself from a situation where you can be harmed. It's about setting boundaries, protecting yourself, and refusing to allow people to take advantage of you again. That realization gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to be cruel to be strong. Silence and action through responsibility became my strongest tools. Slowly, I began rebuilding my life, both financially and emotionally. I cleaned up the mess left behind by years of sacrifice and manipulation. I paid attention to my own goals, worked on my career, and re-established stability. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had space to breathe and think about what I wanted for myself. It was freeing, even though the scars of betrayal remained. Christmas returned to my life with a different feeling. It was no longer about fulfilling obligations or trying to keep up appearances. It became meaningful again, focused on the people and traditions that truly mattered. The celebrations were smaller, quieter, but warmer. I understood that presence and care didn't need to come at the cost of my own well-being. I celebrated the season with people who respected and valued me, and that made it more real than ever. The final lesson I carry with me is simple but powerful: trust must be earned, not given blindly. Family doesn't automatically mean unlimited sacrifice, and love doesn't mean allowing people to use you. Protecting yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you responsible, aware, and strong. I learned that boundaries are a form of love, too, and sometimes the greatest act of care is taking care of yourself first. The experience changed me, but it didn't make me bitter. It made me alert, steady, and capable of recognizing both the good and the bad in people without losing myself. The storm that night was more than weather, it was a symbol, a warning that revealed the truth. It taught me to be cautious, thoughtful, and resilient. And in the end, I keep one thought close, the one that defines the night and everything I learned. I drove through a Christmas storm to surprise my sister, and drove back with my eyes finally open.